Good morning, everyone. My name is Gretchen Rowe, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this conversation about reading and spelling. I am so delighted to have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you and talk about what has become my favorite subject and my favorite product that Demme Learning publishes. This program has been so remarkable and has changed so many students' lives. And it's been a privilege over the last 8 years to be part of that change process. Sandra, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and then we're going to begin our conversation with the PowerPoint. So if you could be so kind.
Sure. Thanks, Gretchen. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Sandra Rush. I am in Georgia, and I have been with Matthew C. Demme Learning for the last 30 years, and I homeschooled my 4 children who are now grown, and some have children of their own who they are homeschooling. And so this is a passion of my heart, is to help homeschooling moms and dads to be able to have success in at least the products that we have, reading, spelling, math, and writing. And so I hope that we can accomplish some of that today. Thanks, Gretchen.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here today, and we're going to get started. So the topic was reading and spelling are not the same skills. And as we progress through this PowerPoint, I think that you will see how they digress. Here are the things we're going to talk about today. Why spelling is so difficult, what happens in our brain between the reading process and the spelling process. We're going to talk a little bit about how memory affects learning. And then we're going to share with you in some depth how you can win at the spelling game. This also says incorporating compositional writing into your academics. And I'm just going to very briefly at the end talk about the newest baby we have delivered. And that's as of January this year. That is our Write Shop component. So let's get started. Often parents will say to me, I just don't understand. I have a very competent reader, and many of you said this when you registered for this, and that reading skill does not translate to spelling. And so I just want to set the stage so that you have some understanding. We have 26 letters in English that make 44 sounds, and we combine them in 250 ways. And as a matter of fact, 47% of the words you use in common communication are not spelled phonetically. There are 300 words that we communicate with in common communications in English, and almost half of those aren't spelled the way they sound. You know, English has evolved from so many other languages, and we've stolen those languages' spelling and brought them to English, which is one of the reasons you see so many different homophones in English. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on in the presentation. As a matter of fact, the more syllables a word has, the less likely it is to be spelled phonetically. So all of us as homeschool parents have been taught to say to our children, well, sound it out, but sound is errant when it comes to spelling. And you know what? Spell check is not a solution. And the reason is because spell check does not correct for context. And if I ask you to spell a word and that word happens to be one of the bajillion homophones that we have in English, if you don't have context, you don't know what spelling to return to me. Now, here's what I want to say about development. Your child has an attention span of their age plus 2 to 3 minutes. And this is for new information. So one of the things that happens in our brain is when we're taking in new information, that cup that new information goes into, if you will, gets full very quickly. And so you're looking at a beloved 10-year-old daughter or son, and they have 12 to maybe 15 minutes of information capacity before they have reached the extent of that. And if you take nothing else away from Sandra's and my conversation today, I want you all to know that that applies to whether it's math or spelling or history. And when we're in a tutorial environment as homeschoolers, we have the opportunity to know how to tailor that to our children. I laughingly, when I talk about this from stage at homeschool conferences, I say, unless you have a teenager who is in puberty, and then you probably need to subtract 2 to 3 minutes, because the truth of the matter is that we have a very limited capacity when we're going through puberty. Those hormones really do a number on our brains, and it's up to us as parents to give our kids a little bit of extra grace. Now, parents will often say to us, why don't we just teach the rules? And one of the rules that parents often quote to me is I before E, except after C. You know, there's 87 spelling rules, and every spelling rule has multiple exceptions. This particular one has a wide variety of exceptions. There's actually 26 exceptions to I before E, except after C in English. So it's really hard to call that a rule. And in fact, one of my daughters said to me, you know, I before E, except after C is disproved by science. And so what is important for me to help you understand is we have taught spelling the same way in the US since Laura Ingalls Wilder rolled across the prairie. And the truth is, it doesn't always a speller make. And there may be many of you who are joining us today who have kids who have really struggled with spelling for a number of years. And you wonder, what is the difference between my child and perhaps another child? In my household, my 4 eldest children, I had 2 children who spelled easily and 2 children who struggled with spelling, and all of them were very competent readers. Here's why reading and spelling are not the same skill set. When we read, we decode. The more we read, the better we decode. And so an efficient reader decodes words they've never seen before and still has the capacity to respond to them easily, know what they mean because they're learning them in context, and to continue to move forward. But the spelling process is actually the opposite process. When we spell, we have to think about encoding. And my example here is the word phone, but there's actually 9 ways to encode the 3 phonemes in that word, but you're only going to produce 1 correct spelling. So this is a reason why you may have a student who's a very confident reader, but not a confident speller. And when we use lists of words, often what we're doing is we're working in the neurology of learning that's called item memory. And if you yourself write a grocery list and leave that grocery list at home, you don't always get what's on the list. Maybe you do. And if you're a natural visual learner, just the act of writing that list out is enough to be able to retain it. But most of us, that list is retained for as long as necessary, which means you bring the groceries home and then you don't remember what the list was. And that's very often what happens with spelling. The list of words is retained as long as necessary, in this case, the test at the end of the week. But the lists never get shuttled into long-term memory. And so this program is going to do something different. And I'm going to turn it over to Sandra now and let her talk a little bit about the 5 stages of spelling development and the research on which this program is based.
Yes, this is a thoroughly researched spelling program. And Dr. Halinga, who developed the program, has taught and worked with students who've had reading and spelling difficulties throughout many years. And I apologize, Gretchen, I can go through the stages, but I did not get to go back and reread the research.
Oh, sure. I'm happy to add to that.
Okay.
I think it would be important for parents to know that what we're going to focus on is stages 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
The phonetic stage, as we walk through the explanation further, you will see that we begin in the phonetic stage. And if you have a fully emerged reader, that's not a stage, you've already negotiated that stage. So that's not a stage at which you would begin your spelling experiences with this program. The vast majority of the program rests in the skill development stage. And the final book in our series is in the word extension stage. And so when we get to the placement, we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. I think what's important for you all to know, and what Sandra and I want you to understand, is the goal here is a skills-based curriculum. So your child will move through these stages at their pace, not at a predetermined pace. Some children catch on to this idea of visual spelling very quickly, and you're very impressed with their progress. Other children take more time, and your child is going to take exactly the amount of time necessary to be successful in this program. So, Sandra, do you want to talk a little bit about the core activities as far as shared reading and what a parent's going to do? What we want to do is kind of fit you in the frame, parents, to understand how the program works. And we're kind of going to do this sort of briefly and rather quickly. And then we're going to open the floor to your questions, because that really is where the meat of the matter is. So, Sandra, can you explain why we do shared reading and what a parent can expect of that process with their student?
Sure. As Gretchen mentioned, when you do a grocery list and you've forgotten the list and you're trying to remember it, it's the same type of process that we normally think of with spelling. You have a list of words, you memorize the spelling with your child of that list of words, they take the test, and next week they're not there. It's because there's nothing in the short-term memory to hook to long enough to get to the long-term memory. So our, or Dr. Halinga's stages and the research stages depend on repetition throughout the week. And so one of those is the first thing that we do in each week's lesson is a shared reading. So you read the story out loud with your student. If they're younger, you're pointing that you're reading left to right. You're pointing out the capitalization, the punctuation. Once you've gone through the story, reading out loud once, then you and your student will do a simultaneous reading out loud together. Take your finger and you point to each word as you're going across the page. Once you've finished with that shared reading, then we have one of the mainstays of our programs, which is chunking. And so research has shown us that most of the most commonly misspelled words depend on 5 different things. One is your vowels that you're mostly all familiar with, your consonants, bossy R. Well, when we are reading these words and we're trying to decode, it's not one letter that makes the sound, it's 2 letters. And so it's not, let's say the word laugh, you've got AU, that makes the A sound. And then you've got a GH, there is no F in that word, but the sound sounds like F, but it's the GH, which is your consonant chunk. So we assign a color to each one of those. So vowels are yellow, consonants are blue, bossy R. The word HORN by phonics rules should say harn, but that bossy R says, no, you're going to say horn. And so we assign it a purple. We have endings, ING, ES, ED. Those are pink. And then we have the tricky Y guy. Change the Y to I, add ES or ED, and it has its own color. So then once you've done the 2 readings, you're going to encourage the student to find all the chunks that they can, whatever the week's focus was. That passage that we had up was just vowels, but as you can see this passage, there's 4, which is the vowels, the consonants, bossy R, and the endings. So it would have more colors on the page that they're looking for. If they didn't find quite all of them, your instruction manual is very important as well, and it will let you know how many chunks you're supposed to find of each kind that week. So if they found 11 and it was supposed to be 12, then you could assist them in finding the other one. The facing page, as you can see here.
I'm just going to get, before you move on to talk about the facing page, I just wanted to give you the examples so that you could go through and show the parents how they would do this. So,
Okay.
I have to apologize to you all. Sandra's at a disadvantage because I have the PowerPoint on my screen. So it's just showing up, ta-da, on hers. So.
Okay, we'll make it work here. So as you can see, they've found a few of the vowel chunks in this on this page, this passage that they had here. So they, as you can see, they have the double E, they have the EY. That is a vowel sound. AY is a vowel sound. You've got AI, OU, and OU. And as you see in that word throughout, that OU makes two different sounds. You've got the oo sound and the ow sound. So no wonder language is confusing for our students as far as spelling goes.
And Sandra, here's the next one. So if we were going through and asking a student to chunk for two kinds of chunks, we would ask them to chunk for the first kind and then the second kind. So I'll let you talk about those consonants.
So as you see now, we have blue chunks in there, and they came from the consonant chunks list. And so they look at the consonant chunks list and they go through and they find as many as they can. And then if they haven't found all of them that your instruction manual or your teacher's guide tells you to do, then you encourage them to look again. And believe me, you may think, oh, well, that's easy. I don't need an instruction manual. Well, there's more information in the instruction manual than just the chunking. But when you start getting more than one type of chunk there, it's very hard to find them all. And if you don't have the instruction manual, how do you know you found them all? So it is important to know what your goal is, what you're looking for. Thanks, Gretchen.
Part of the reason that we're seeking this exercise is because we want the student to focus on the small elements of language that are constant and maybe not related to sound. For instance, the vowel combination EW says ooh in the word do and O in the word so. And Sandra's giving you a wonderful example of the word throughout. It has OU twice and they make two different sounds. So you can see why sounding out words becomes a little bit problematic for students. The second activity is going to be copywork. And I need to say one more thing about the shared reading before we move forward. Often I'll have parents who'll say to me, well, my student is perfectly capable of reading the passage. And that is absolutely true. And we want your students' spelling experiences to be easier than what they're typically reading. And so we're deliberatively going to place them in a level of spelling you see that is easier than their reading experiences. The whole purpose of shared reading, however, is because we're all natural editors and we tend to edit so that it sounds right to our own head. And we want your student to see exactly what is written in the passage as it is written. So that is really the purpose of why you're going to read to your student every day and read with your student every day. Your buy-in there is about 2 whole minutes. And from that point forward, your student can roll on their own. Now I'm going to let Sandra talk about copywork.
Okay. Well, some of these things that are showing on this screen are also a part of the reading, because we are going to do those double readings 5 days of the week. If you do a 5-day school week, if you do a 4-day, you can adjust it to be your 4-day school week. But when we are chunking, we are training the eye and the brain, the visual and muscle memory, as it says there, to look for not just one single letter in each word, or each sound, it's 2 letters. And so not only is it just looking, but we're then going to have our brain looking at the colors that we've chunked. On the facing page, we are going to have the student copy part of the passage. And the second day would be a different part of the passage. The third day, you go back to the first passage. So notice that there is a lot of repetition in this program, because it takes that repetition to hook to the short-term memory long enough to get to the long-term memory. And so we're recognizing the letter patterns there. Your long-term memory retention is being done throughout the repetition throughout the week. When we copy, we want to watch the student copy each word. And if there's any wrong spelling, wrong letters that are put there, we don't want the brain to process that incorrect information. So we want to pause the student immediately and praise them where you can. So let's say it was the word meadow, and this will come in dictation as well. So the student spelled it M-E-D-O-W. When you praise them, oh, you did a great job hearing that short E sound, but can you think of just a little different way to spell that word? You also got the OW chunk, so that one's taken care of, but let's think about that word, or let's look back. If we're copying, let's look back at what we're copying. Then as soon as they get it correct, you go right back to letting them finish copying. Some of the passages, you're going to set a timer for 10 minutes. And if the timer goes off before they get all the way through copying the passage, that's okay. They'll get faster as you go along. And so you want to celebrate whether you're doing the copy work or whether you're doing the dictation later in the week. You want to celebrate the number of words they spell correctly, which should be all of them, because you corrected as you went along. And that's extremely important, to correct as you go along. So it's that positive reinforcement as well. It's important to use a pencil. The drag of the pencil produces new neural neurons that an ink pen or a computer do not. So use your pencil, and also then you're going to have them chunk that page, because the brain processes their own handwriting or their own printing differently than it does the printed font. So it's important to utilize each piece as you go through.
I think one of the things that's important for parents to remember too, Sandra, is the copy work does not have to be tidy.
Exactly. Right. If you try to zoom in on correcting their copy work or their printing, you're going to take their focus off of spelling. And so you've defeated part of the purpose of what you were doing there. So it is important to just let them write what comes naturally.
Terrific. Let me see here. Now what I want to do is progress to talk about dictation. And Sandra, do you want to spend a little bit of time talking with parents about what they can expect from their dictation experience with their students?
Sure. Again, it's repetition each day. So you're doing the double readings, and then you've done the copy work. Now we're at Friday for the younger students, Thursday for the older students, and we're going to set a timer for 10 minutes for dictation. And we are going to dictate word by word to our students, letting them write each word before we dictate the next one. And again, it's important that they correct immediately if they've written something wrong. So you want to leave the timer going, but pause the student, and again, praise them if you can. You want it to be a positive experience, so you let them figure out what's wrong, and if you can, and then you just draw a light line through it, get the correction after 2 or 3 times. When it's correct, you go right back to dictating. But again, once the timer goes off, we want to stop, because that's their attention span. And it doesn't matter if they didn't get but 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through. Again, they'll get faster as you move forward with the process, but we've exhausted their attention span. So now, again, we want to make it a positive experience. So we celebrate the number of words we spell correctly, which is all of them, because you corrected as you went along. So they come out of it feeling good. And then you count the number of correct words. And I'm not sure, Gretchen, that's the first time I've actually feel like I've seen that, counting the number of correct words. So what does that do for us?
So the goal here is to see that number grow over time. And Dr. Halinga says it's a totally arbitrary number. So if you have a student who has misspelled the word, so in Sandra's example of the word meadow, let's say your student misspelled that word in the dictation, and then you paused and helped them correct it to the correct spelling. And here's the cool part about this, because it's a practice-based curriculum, you can even show them how to spell the word. We prefer you not to verbalize the spelling to them, because remember, we're working on cultivating a visual skill. So we'd like you to show them the word if necessary, because we don't want them to get stressed. But Dr. Halinga says any word that they've corrected, you give them a couple extra points for, and counting the total number of correct words at the bottom of each dictation experience then gives the student a target that they have achieved. And over time, the goal is to grow the number of correct words. Please remember that in the dictation, the goal is never to finish the dictation. The goal is to spell words correctly, and that makes a tremendous amount of difference.
Exactly.
Now, I think the next thing we want to do is, I had said at the outset when we were talking that this program focuses on stages 2, 3, and 4 of spelling development. Those stages were not determined by us. They were determined by research out of the McGuffey Institute at the University of Virginia. And so we have just taken that information, we have applied it through this program. This is the scope and sequence that you are looking at for a Spelling UC experience. And we're going to dig into this just a little bit deeper. What I want you to know is, regardless of the age of your student, you meet your student at their skill level. So if you have an 11-year-old who's reading, you would not begin Spelling UC at level A. Level A is designed to work on the skill of phonemic awareness and help a student emerge as a reader. And we're going to go into a little bit more depth as we go through this. We've got a couple more slides for you, and then we'll turn our attention to your questions. So the downloadable Spelling UC guidelines are available on our website. You can certainly find those there. There are target paragraphs that we would like your student to be able to read out loud. And there is a list of words that should aid you in placement. But I want to encourage you that being able to read the paragraph, the target paragraph seamlessly, is a better arbiter of your student's placement than being able to hit the target words. Because what we've found is we can provide students those target words in a static environment, and sometimes we'll have students that can spell those statically, in other words, individually as you're sitting there prompting them, but then in a compositional writing experience, they can't reproduce those same words. So the target words were really developed to give you an idea as a parent of what the minimum Lexile score for the experience would be, but reading that paragraph seamlessly is where you really want to focus. Sandra, is there anything else you want to say about the reading guidelines before we move forward?
No, I think that covers it. So,
okay. All right. So here we're going to talk a little bit about level A. And if you have a student who has not yet begun to read, but they're beginning to, they can write their own name, they can identify most, but not all of the letters of the alphabet, and they've begun writing in lowercase letters, level A is a perfect experience for that student. And level A will actually not only help you cultivate that skill of spelling, but will help your student emerge as a reader. And here's what I want you all to see. This is a sample page. This is page 4A. And in the level A experience, you're looking at 1 page per day and a total amount of time with your student of 10 minutes. So you can see that letterbox component there on the bottom. And when we're working with letterboxes, we are working with segmenting sound. We are dictating letter as sound. So if you look at that first box there, I've actually pulled the handbook here so that I can tell you that that first box there on the bottom under write the words your teacher says would be the word wrap. And you would dictate that as p. And then you would ask your student to write each one of those individual letters in the box. Yes, the A is a gimme at this point in the experience. And the reason for that is we want to model everything for the student we're going to ask the student to do. The word below it is the word ham. At the end of 10 minutes, even if your student has only filled in 3 letter boxes, your task is complete, because remember, your task is to engage with this for 10 minutes, not to exhaust the student. And at the end of 10 minutes, we'd encourage you to have your student read back to you the words that they have written.
and can I say a word there real quick?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Just as you notice, we're sounding out the letters there. So that is preparing that young student for the dictation that we get into in the second book of the next level, Jack and Jill. So it's not just, why am I writing these letters? As you notice, the letters at the top are also letters that are used in the words in the bottom when you're dictating them. And one other point is that your student doesn't have to be reading here, but one of the things that Dr. Halinga recommended when I asked her about it, because it's what I had used to teach my daughter to read. And I said, this looks very similar to how I taught my daughter to read. And I mentioned the book, which is Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. We don't carry it, but you can get it from Amazon for about $18. And maybe Gretchen, you might be able to put that in the comments for them. But that book looks very similar to this page that's here. So you've taught them to read going into using the same process in our spelling.
And I think that makes a tremendous amount of difference for you as a parent of a young student, is to recognize that they have a limited amount of capacity. Now what we're going to do is we're still going to begin in Jack and Jill at that phonetic stage, at working on the skill of phonemic awareness, but now we're going to work specifically with passages that are nursery rhymes. And I had 4 or 5 parents ask me this past weekend at a homeschool conference, why do you all use nursery rhymes? And that's because they allow us an enormous amount of wordplay in a small amount of words. And a student might not be able to read the word tumbling from Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill all as a static word by itself. But if they hear the rhyme, then they can parse out the word together. And what we are seeking to do, as Sandra has said, is we're going to walk this child along a path so that they can have a successful dictation experience when they get to the second half of this program. And I think that I was looking to see if I had an example. I do not have an example of placement level B here so that you can see what it looks like. What we're now doing is we're moving to 2 pages a day. So you're going to have the written passage on the left page and copy work on the right. And the copy work in level A is going to be limited strictly to the letters. The copy work in level B is going to begin with a little bit more copy work, and we will gradually progress your student into more copy work. And I'll have one more observation to say about copy work at the very end. So Sandra, do you have anything else that you want to share with parents about level B before we progress?
No, except that the first book will be very similar to the level A, still continuing the letter boxes, but you're adding in some copy work as well. Then the second book will begin the actual what we call normal process of the typical spelling you see process, with the double readings, finding the chunks, and the copying.
Absolutely. From levels C through F, the first question I want you to ask yourself before you look at placement is to ask what your student is currently reading. And you can see here in this placement paragraph, we're looking at a single paragraph for a student to be able to read to you. If your student is really struggling within this paragraph for level C, then they're not ready to begin the level C experience. But if they can read the paragraph pretty seamlessly, then they are perhaps ready for level C. I want to make one observation about this bullet point here that says, can the student successfully spell 80% of the target words? What we want you to know is sometimes your student will be able to read the passage seamlessly and can't spell those target words. Given the fact that you're going to engage daily in the shared reading process with them, we're not concerned about that. So the target words are not a deal breaker for you as far as a parent is concerned. It's that passage reading that should be what sets it apart. And levels C through F each have a passage that is a little bit progressively more complex in educational speak It means it has a higher Lexile score, meaning the words have a higher degree of complexity. Let me also say, as placement is concerned for you as parents, we recommend if you have a child who is struggling in their compositional spelling, in other words, when they write a composition, they are not spelling very well, not to place the child above level E in the program, regardless of what they can read, regardless of the number of static words that they can spell in those lists. And that's because they just need time to cultivate that visual experience. And if you place them too high in the program, they won't have the opportunity to do that. Sandra, before we move on, do you have any observations there for our parents?
No, you covered it well. Thank you.
Okay. Level G is a student who's a proficient speller, but might benefit from studying the weird idiosyncrasies that are part of American English. I'll give you an example of that. In the word excite, E-X-C-I-T-E, we take the E off to make the word exciting, but we keep the E to make the word excitement. It's enough to drive any emerging speller totally insane. And so in this particular level, we're going to engage in not just a spelling experience, but at a vocabulary experience, so that we'll have a deeper understanding of why some of those things exist in English. Sandra, do you have anything to add there?
No, thank you.
All right. Right about now, I typically have parents who are saying to us, I don't know if I can see myself fitting in the frame. I don't know if I can see myself doing this with multiple children. We put together this week of a chart of what the week looks like so that you as a parent would know exactly what your responsibilities are. So daily, you're going to read the passage to your child and read the passage with your child. If your child is above level B, part 1, then they're going to chunk the passage individually. And you're going to, in the first day of the week, you're going to check their chunks. And then they can use that first day of the week's experiences to check their chunks in the later days of the week. Please make sure that you recognize that we want this to be a positive and affirming experience. And Dr. Halinga was very deliberative in not including any kind of a test situation because she wanted to keep those learning pathways early and open. One of the things that you're going to see here is have your child do 10 minutes of copy work on the passage. And I know specifically, as I said earlier, I wanted to address this. Statistically, there's at least 30% of you who are sitting there thinking, I can't even get my son to pick a pencil up, much less do 10 minutes of copy work. 10 minutes is the goal. You can start with as little as 3 minutes because this is a neurological enterprise. So if 10 minutes sounds like a deal breaker for you, start with 3 minutes and gradually work up through the first semester to that 10 minutes. You'd be amazed at the changes that will be wrought in your student as you're able to do that. In the last 2 days of the week, you will have to reserve 10 minutes for each one of your students for dictation, whether it's 1 day or 2 days a week. But I think this makes it very doable to do with multiple children. And what I want you to be able to understand is if you have more than one child doing the program and they're at different levels, they can actually check each other's chunking. And that gives you a sense of a little bit of altruism between them and buys you back a little bit of time. So daily, you're looking at 1 to 2 minutes of interaction with your student. And then weekly, you're looking at 10 minutes for the dictation if you have a student who is at that level. Sandra, what else do you have to say here?
You covered it. Like I said, it's important that you do every day, at least 4 days, each of the facets of the program, because it's that repetition that's going to build those neurological pathways to the long-term memory that you want your student to have for success with the program.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've reached the end of the presentation. We're going to stop sharing and we're going to turn our attention now to the questions that you all have asked, because I think this is really important. Let me also say that if anything that we've said in the last period of time has brooked another question for you, please feel free to ask it in the chat. One of the things I think that is really important is to recognize that reading skill and spelling skill aren't equivalent skills. Many of you, when you registered for this, said, I have a confident reader who's a terrible speller, and we're not surprised, because the truth of the matter is spelling is a visual skill, and it takes time to cultivate that visual skill. And this program will help you achieve success. I think, Sandra, I want you to answer this question because I thought it was really interesting. Learning why siblings have such vastly different spelling abilities when both are reading well. And I know you've heard this question at conferences, so can you speak to that and answer that question for parents?
Yes, because I have 4 children and 3 of them are boys. And I always question, how can 3 children from the same 2 parents be so different? But two of those boys, and then my daughter, who is my youngest, they could spell great. But one of my sons, I would give him the word, I would spell the word, or he would be spelling the word to me, and I'd be writing it on a whiteboard so he could see it correctly. And so he's hearing it, he's seeing it, all those things they tell you. As soon as he'd spell it incorrectly, they'd have a dictionary, and I'd say, okay, look up the word in the dictionary and spell the rest of it for me. And they did. So he would see it correctly in the dictionary and on the whiteboard. 5 minutes later, that son could not spell that word. But the really odd thing is that he would get 100 percentile on a spelling test, on spelling achievement test. And so I racked my brain, and then somewhere around age 11 or 12, whatever neural pathway that needed to connected. And he, became a great speller. He loves to write. He writes articles all the time. But he was an absolutely great reader. All of my kids were great readers. But as you see, there are struggles. It's, there's just, their brains are wired differently. They can get it in often, but for some reason can't get it out. And something you either have to, switch gears and work differently, or use spelling, or, give it a little bit of time. And then that's important. Don't come down hard on them. Give them the time that they need. Interact, engage with your student.
One of the things I think that many of you have asked is, how does this program help a dyslexic learn to spell? And I'm the parent of 2 dyslexics, one with a very mild dyslexia and one with a very acute dyslexia. And when this program debuted 8 years ago, they were 14 and 8. And I wanted to use this program with both of them. And the 14-year-old gave me pushback in the way only a 14-year-old boy can give you pushback. Starting with probably something like you guys have heard, which is, I don't know why you're trying to teach me to spell. I have dyslexia, dyslexics can't spell, yada, yada, yada. The bottom line was, I insisted that he spend 6 weeks in the program because I needed to know how that program worked. And at the end of 6 weeks, I said to him at his final dictation, I said, okay, bud, you're off the hook. You don't have to do this anymore. And he paused and said, no, I think you're wrong. I think I do. This is making a difference for me. Now, he'll never win a spelling bee. But what I didn't know was the intrinsic value of teaching him that he could, as opposed to he couldn't. And he used the program only for a year, and it increased his confidence exponentially. And that was worth the price of admission. He was willing to submit to doing this because he could see that the process would make a difference for him. And that's the conversation I have with parents of dyslexics all the time. What you've done to this point in time has not worked. What if you could do something that changed your child's attitude about their experiences? And that to me was invaluable. Now, let me also say something. When you look at the placement tools, and I went through the placement target words, Duncan at 14 could not spell a single target word in any list, not a one. And his younger brother was very obviously easily dropped into level D at the age of 8. He could spell all those target words and read the passage seamlessly. There would have been no buy-in on Duncan's part if I had placed him in level C below level D because of his target word struggle. What we ended up doing in consultation with Dr. Halinga is we placed Owen at 8 in level D and Duncan at 14 in level E. He could not spell a single target word for that passage. The key, however, was he could read the target passage seamlessly. And because of that, he was able to develop a spelling confidence. So that's why earlier when I said the target words are not the be all end all, they're just kind of give you a minimum Lexile score. It's that being able to read the passage seamlessly that results in a successful experience. I want to tell you that as a placement consultant for the last 8 years, I have worked with countless families for whom this program has been a huge game changer. And Sandra, do you have a family with whom you have interacted with the program that you might be able to share with the families as success?
Well, the family I had in mind actually was trying to place the student and find out if it would work for him, because he too was like your oldest in that he was older and couldn't spell. The sad thing was when I was talking with him at the convention, he agreed to talk with me. I asked him how to say he would spell the word meadow, and he spelled it exactly the example that I usually give. And then I, tried the process of how can we correct that kind of thing. And he did, but he ended up in tears. So I felt really bad. But they wanted to think about it and talk with him, and they walked away and they came back the next day. And I didn't wait on them when they came in, but they were about to leave. And she turned to me and she said, he put himself in level D. I had suggested E, as Gretchen said, for her son, but he chose to put himself in level D. So, it's not success on the other end, but that just was really a success for me, because even though he went away in tears, he knew what
he came back. And I think you need to understand, all of us here at Demme Learning have a vested interest in seeing that your children have success in what they do. Our goals, everyone who works on the front line of talking to parents either homeschooled themselves, was homeschooled, presently homeschools, or has worked with families in positions of homeschool advocacy for years and years. Mm-hmm. And you see how emotional that was for Sandra. Yeah. Seeing that kind of success, seeing a student willing to try is an enormous game changer for so many students. And, I want to say as an aside, I had several conversations this past weekend at a homeschool conference with parents who said, I want my kids to develop spelling confidence because I have none. I don't spell well. Mm-hmm. And this program is not designed for a student at a specific age or a specific grade. Over the years, I've been humbled by a number of parents who have said, I'm going to come alongside my student and I'm going to learn to spell right along with them. That is more powerful of a lesson than anything else that you can possibly model for your students. So if you're a hesitant speller, let me encourage you that this program can be a game changer for you as well. I did have 2 parents who ask about how can teaching reading through spelling be a positive experience? And so here's what the research that undergirds this program tells us. When we have a student who emerges as a reader, we get really excited. If you're a parent who's taught a child to read, you know how wonderful it is. And you start saying, oh, read this book and read this book and read that book. And it's just an amazing experience. But what we fail to take into account is the necessity of learning the skill of fluency. So reading proficiency is built by reading the same book or the same passage more than once. And I know from having conversations with hundreds of parents and having been the mother of 6 myself, that often our children will just cleave onto a book that drives us crazy, but they want to read that book every single day. And I want to encourage you as parents to hang in there and just indulge them, because what is happening that we don't see is the ordering of their neurological pathways. And it is a tremendously important experience. So for you as a parent, even though you're reading A Fly Went By for the 1,000th time, it is important for your student to engage in that process. So to answer the questions that several parents put forth about how can a spelling program improve reading, it's because you're going to be working with the same passage multiple days in a row. There are 36 lessons in every edition of Spelling UC in every level. Our expectation is that most of us school 30 to 32 weeks a year. You can skip a week's worth of lessons and continue to move forward and still have success. Now, I'm a good German girl and I'm an only child and I'm as cheap as they come. And if I bought the materials, I want you to do every page because I spent the money. But here's what I want you to know as a parent. Because it's a practice-based program, no, you don't have to go back and finish the copy work they didn't finish today. Tomorrow, start a new page. It is tremendously edifying for them to realize they don't have to do every page. And sometimes we have a week where Monday is great and Tuesday goes completely sideways and there goes the rest of the week. And that's okay. Move on to the next lesson the following week. Because this is a skills-based, practice-oriented curriculum, you will still have success. We're at the bottom of the hour. Sandra, I can't believe we've gotten through this hour so quickly. Do you have any closing words for our families?
Well, again, each student is different. Each student is wired neurologically different. And that's the goal with Spelling UC, is to work with your student and to give them freedom to make mistakes, but correct them gently. And just, again, that repetition is very important. And stop when you need to. As Gretchen said, tomorrow's a new day. And so just begin again the next day. And we look forward to hearing your successes that you had with Spelling UC.
If you have specific questions about placement for your student, let me encourage you to reach out to us. You might have a conversation with Sandra on the phone or through chat. We'd be happy to help. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Take care.
Thanks for coming. Bye.
I wanted to take just a couple more minutes and talk to you about the newest addition to the Demme Learning family, and that is Write Shop. Write Shop is a compositional writing program designed for K through 12 students. And the flagship product is called Write Shop 1 and 2. This is where the developer began 25 years ago. And having been a homeschool parent who taught compositional writing for 15 of the 21 years that I homeschooled my students, I want you to know that this program is tremendous. I didn't know about it because it came to us from the West Coast. But it does have the Demme learning philosophy of bringing as many senses to the table as possible. Compositional writing is the most difficult task we as homeschool parents ask of our children. We ask them to sit down and write a creative composition, and they have to think about what they want to say, how they want to say it, how they want to spell it, how they want to punctuate it, what creative words to use, and it can be a tremendously frustrating task. And then you add to that task the possibility that the subject matter might be predetermined for them, and kids just don't want to participate. The thing that I love about this program is that it's not prescriptive. It's going to give you the guidelines to create a wonderful compositional process with your student, and your student gets to choose what they would choose to write about. And that is fantastic. Write Shop, just like the other Demme Learning products, tailors itself to meet your students' needs. You can take a Write Shop experience and make it exactly what you want. I'd encourage you to visit the Demme Learning website to find your way to Write Shop, or go straight to the Write Shop website, which is WRITESHOP.com. You can use the placement tools there to determine where to begin, or you can pick up the phone and call one of our placement specialists. They're happy to help you. And we are so excited about the addition of this product that in September, we're going to be doing a roundtable talking specifically about how to teach your children compositional writing skills. Because if it's been a struggle in your family, we want to resolve that struggle. Please look on our events page and join us for that event. And welcome to the Write Shop family as well. Take care, everyone.